In order for me to get started, I need to talk a little bit about the image and likeness of God. You know, in Isaiah we hear a statement that Isaiah saw God. And he went into a big description that had nothing to do with God. God didn't have the wings. When he says he saw God, all he saw was God's hem. He didn't describe the face. We are created in the image and likeness of God. We're supposed to see God, and my question to you is, what does that mean? So I'm going to put on a costume. There we go. We know from Michelangelo that God has a long white beard. Or maybe from some other people. In fact, much of our Christian symbolism comes from Greek art. Now, if you don't like Greek art, I had to cut a mouthhole so I could still hit the microphone. If you don't like Greek art, it just becomes kind of meaningless to have a Santa Claus beard, as someone said today, in order for that to be God. So when we are creating the image and likeness of God, Michelangelo's likeness of God has a long white beard. Do we think God has a long white beard? The concept of what it means to look like God has been hotly debated, by the way. Some people say, well, God for me is female, God for me is male. We get into all these gender wars, and what I like to say is, God, help us. Because when we think about the image and likeness of God, we are grounding ourselves too much in our preconceptions of this world. We really care about whether or not God has a long white beard, whether or not God is white, black, Asian, you name it. We really care what gender God is. We ask this question of what does God look like, but what if the image and likeness of God has absolutely nothing to do with what we might see on television? What if the image and likeness of God we're talking about is actually God's characteristics of being loving, truthful, good? What if the image we are talking about is something we choose not to think about, because more often than not, when we think about what it means to be like God, we would much rather do something else that's more fun. Now, when you think about the Trinity, by the way, just with this, when you think about the Trinity, if we're creating the image and likeness of God and God is a Trinity, does that make you an unknowable kind of mist, a gushing wind, or make you look like Jesus? The whole notion of what the Trinity plays into this as well. If we take the notion of the Trinity as being more about what we think, what we want to have happen, and what we do, well, that's a lot easier for most of us, right? Because I'm guessing most of you think, maybe a few of you don't. Most of you care about stuff, I hope. And most of you, you made it to church today, so you did something. Congratulations, you did something today. Most of you have thought, emotion, and action. What if these concepts are the concepts of the real image and likeness of God? At one point, and I'm not faulting gorillas, please don't take me as being anti-gorilla, I'm not. At one point, gorillas were thought to be more evolved because they looked like humans. Dogs are less evolved because they go on all fours. But the amount of evolution that happened is actually the same for each of them. Dogs have had as much evolution as people have had. If we have a single Genesis point, when it all took the same amount of time, we all had different things impact how we became what we became, the amount of evolution does not mean one is more evolved or less evolved, but because gorillas look more like people, they must be more advanced. It's not necessarily true. We need to get beyond this concept because we, in fact, even could have another person who is not very thoughtful, and they behave much more animalistically, ruled by their passions without the ability to think themselves out of their desires. Image and likeness are about more than a white beard and the way we see things on the outside. What we think is true, what we think is good, the freedom to act, these are the things that actually make us more like God. So when we think of this concept we hear about in the gospel today, about rebirth, one of the big things that people always say is, what do you mean you can be born again? Are you going to come out of the mother's womb a second time? And the response is, no, it's about being spiritually born from above. Well, what does that mean? I don't know if you ever thought, how long does it take to be born? In our medical world, you can have lots of labor, or you can have little labor. But we generally have it as a surgical procedure. But when does that child shift between being a baby to a toddler, to a child, to an adolescent? We oftentimes just do it by physical appearance. How do they appear? How old are they? And we categorize behavior by age. Anyone who knows kids know that age does not necessarily matter. It's not a magic turning point. The reality is, when we think about what it means for someone to actually be a full adult, we usually tie it to behavior and not to whether or not they have a beard. Sorry, Lyle, that doesn't make you more grown up. In some cultures, if you get married is when you get the term for being an adult. That if you don't get married, you never actually grow up. For some, it comes with parenthood. What are the qualities, though, that are about growing up? A child, when they are born, does not become fully developed until what, around the age of 25? Believe it or not, that's when decision-making starts to be able to be regulated in brain chemistry. So when people ask the question, don't you think I make good choices, and they're under the age of 25, you have scientific evidence to say, no, I don't. Image and likeness in just becoming a person. We can't figure out when one moment ends and when you become really a full adult. Why do we think that spiritual growth can come with a membership card? If I attend the right church, if I go through the act of baptism, that means I'm fully spiritually formed. If I say certain words, that means I am fully spiritually formed. And I would argue that if it is difficult to tell the difference between, we'll say, a baby and a toddler and an adolescent and a teen, it's probably difficult for us to tell the difference in where we are spiritually. Swedenborg has a concept called ruling loves. Ruling loves are basically a little king inside yourself. Who is it that is in charge of your thoughts and your life on a daily basis? Now, it's a king. You might have little chieftains under the king where you have moments where you go out and do something that seems different. But what do you actually love? What do you actually care about? It is argued that we start caring about ourselves. Does anybody argue this? Right around 8 years old, Victor's having a child who can successfully begin to comprehend lying to their parent. Right before, like 4 and 5, it's great. The kid will lie, and you'll be like, is that true? And the kid will just go, no. But someday they realize, wow, I cannot tell the truth, and my parent might not figure it out. Well, all of a sudden, they can start making decisions for themselves. Much like Adam and Eve, when they were able to take the fruit from the tree and lie to God, all of a sudden we have this great power to understand ourselves as being different from the person who created us. We can understand ourselves as being different from God, and the second we can do that, we can make the decision that we ourselves want to be God. I want to create the world in my image. Anyone who is over the age of 40 and looks back on kids can say to themselves, no, I want that kid to live up to my expectations of what it means to be an adult. Any kid can look up at adults and say, no, I want my expectation about what that parent should do. We can come into huge fights because we each want the world to be our way. But we've been given a gift. We have been given the gift to be able to actually separate what we think from what we love. And somebody might say, why is that a gift? It's a gift because we have the ability to lift our thoughts, our minds, into what is better for us, and then we have a difficult choice to make. We have a choice to make on whether or not we live what it is we think. Now, of course, somebody would say, oh, come on. If I think something's good, of course I'm going to do it, right? But every one of us has had a diet at some point in our lives, right? Oh, I need to avoid this food. And you don't. Oh, I need to do this. And you don't. I would like to meet a person who always says to themselves, boy, this is the way I should live, and is able to successfully do every goal and thing they realize is better. We are given Scripture, we are given church, we are given faith as a way of helping us see a life that's better than the selfishness that we were born into. To spiritually mature beyond that point is difficult. It takes a lifetime. No matter how many times you get baptized, and I know people who love to get baptized for fun, believe it or not. They go to churches and love to get baptized. I know people who like to join lots of different churches so they can collect all the membership cards. None of that matters. What matters is whether or not you are growing your ruling love from being the little me king to the big God king inside. From living a life that's completely and totally self-involved around what it is that you want. And anyone who thinks they didn't start out there, again, I would point out, go to preschool. You will see kids living a life of absolute selfishness. They're cute as buttons, don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-kid. But at the end of the day, if the kid doesn't get what they want, they don't sit down and say, well, I understand that there might be other things that are more important for me to focus on. I'm going to listen to what you say, delay my gratification, and I will think about that toy truck 2 or 3 days from now and how to best acquire it and fit it into my daily schedule. They just drop on the ground and cry, right? They don't care whether or not they're causing you back pain from having to pick them up and get them to go with the rest of the group. Completely and totally selfishly involved. Now, as we grow and we get more language skills, that selfishness becomes much more difficult. we can sit there and clearly make choices that are all about us. Being born from above is a process of growth, allowing God to take root as the reason that we act. Letting love for our neighbor actually say, you know, it's my day off today. I'm going to go and help somebody else. Feeling the joy in that versus it's my day off, I'm going to stay in my pajamas and play video games all day. There's a transformation that occurs when we live a life that's actually about love and care towards the neighbor, love and care towards God. And that is the transformation where, honestly, everything that you touch becomes different. A door, which before was about how do I get and get what I want, becomes a door about how do I go and do something that's loving for another person. The door hasn't changed being a door, but the reason you open it has. And it is a transformation of soul, mind, and body that shifts why you do everything. To be born again is a transformation of your simple desire of why am I getting up this morning? And I'm getting up this morning to run the rat race so I can go on the vacation I want to go on? Or am I getting up this morning because I have the chance to share God's love with the people around me? What would a change in perspective be like for you if that were the case? A change in perspective where you go into your job and you see your job as a divine calling to love other people versus I need to get enough money so I can pay my mortgage. Don't get me wrong. I know it's really hard to not get fixated on the need to pay your rent, your mortgage, whatnot. The two don't have to exist separately. You can actually do God's will and pay your mortgage. Don't worry. Both are allowed. But what would it be like if every day you defined it through a lens of loving others in what you did? This is what it's like to be born anew. You see the world in a new way. God is residing through all of your action and not just as a distant first mover who set everything in motion. So this week, I hope you can take some time to wake up in the morning, whether you are on the way to work, whether you are taking a day off, whether you are doing something, and simply ask yourself the question, what would it be like today if God were the one running my life versus the various needs of this world? What would it be like if we were internally controlled versus controlled by the stuff around us? Amen.